Australia is unusual before the story even begins. It is a country, an island continent, and a vast geographic world almost by itself. Officially called the Commonwealth of Australia, it includes the mainland continent, Tasmania, and many smaller islands scattered around its coasts. By land area, it is the sixth largest country on Earth, yet its population is smaller than many individual megacities. That contrast is the key to understanding Australia: enormous space, concentrated settlement, and a national identity shaped by distance. Much of the interior is dry, flat, and sparsely populated, while most people live near the coastal edges, especially in the east and southeast. So Australia is not simply a place with beaches and wildlife. It is a continent-sized society built around the challenge of living with isolation, climate extremes, and extraordinary natural scale. The physical landscape of Australia helps explain almost everything that followed. It is often described as the flattest and driest inhabited continent, which means it lacks the large mountain systems and abundant inland rivers that shaped many other civilizations. The interior contains deserts and semi-arid regions where water is scarce and distances are immense. But Australia is not one single environment. Its size creates striking contrasts: tropical rainforests in parts of the north and northeast, temperate regions in the south, rugged coastlines, savannas, wetlands, coral reefs, and inland plains. This variety makes Australia megadiverse, meaning it contains an exceptional range of species and ecosystems. Its long isolation also allowed many animals and plants to evolve in ways rarely seen elsewhere. Geography did not just form Australia's scenery, it set the conditions for culture, settlement, transport, farming, and survival. Long before European maps named the continent, people were already living there. The ancestors of Aboriginal Australians began arriving from Southeast Asia roughly 50,000 to 65,000 years ago, during the last glacial period, when sea levels and land connections were different from today. That makes Indigenous Australian cultures among the oldest continuous cultures in the world. By the time British settlement began, Aboriginal Australians spoke more than 250 distinct languages. This is important because it shows that pre-colonial Australia was not culturally empty or uniform. It contained many peoples, territories, knowledge systems, and relationships to land. Survival across deserts, coasts, forests, and river regions required deep environmental understanding. Land was not merely territory in a modern political sense. It was connected to law, identity, story, responsibility, and continuity across generations. Australia's European written history began gradually, not with one single discovery moment. Dutch navigators explored and mapped much of the coastline in the 17th century, adding parts of the continent to European knowledge even before permanent European settlement. But the decisive colonial turning point came with Britain. In 1788, the British established the penal colony of New South Wales. This means the early colonial project was tied directly to punishment, empire, and forced transportation. Convicts, soldiers, administrators, and later free settlers became part of a society expanding along the coast and eventually inland. For Indigenous peoples, colonization brought dispossession, disease, violence, and massive disruption. For Britain, Australia became a distant imperial possession. For the continent itself, it marked the beginning of a new political and demographic order imposed on an already ancient human landscape. During the 19th century, European settlement expanded across more of the continent. By the mid-1800s, most of Australia had been explored by European settlers, at least from the colonial perspective, and additional British colonies were established beyond New South Wales. These colonies gradually developed their own governments and institutions. By 1890, 6 colonies had gained responsible government, meaning local political leaders held increasing authority over domestic affairs. This created an unusual political pattern. Australia was still tied to Britain, but its colonies were becoming more self-governing. The continent was not yet one unified country. It was a set of separate colonial societies with shared British legal traditions, different local interests, and a growing awareness that cooperation would be necessary for defense, trade, immigration, infrastructure, and identity. The creation of modern Australia came through federation. In 1901, the colonies joined together to form the Commonwealth of Australia. This was not a revolution in the classic sense, it was a negotiated political union. Federation created a national government while preserving state governments, producing the federal structure Australia still uses today. The country remained connected to the British Empire, but over time it gained greater legal independence. The Statute of Westminster Adoption Act in 1942 was a major step in autonomy, and the Australia Act of 1986 is often seen as the final legal break in which the United Kingdom's power over Australian law ended. This gradual path matters because Australia's independence was not declared in one dramatic event. It emerged through constitutional evolution, institutional maturity, and a slow rebalancing of imperial ties into national sovereignty. Today, Australia is a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy. That means elected representatives run the government, while the monarch remains the formal head of state, represented in Australia by the Governor-General. It is also a federation made up of 6 states and 10 territories. This structure matters because power is divided across national and regional levels, shaping everything from health and education to infrastructure and emergency management. Canberra is the capital, chosen as a planned political centre rather than simply giving the role to Sydney or Melbourne. Those 2 cities are the largest, each with more than 5 million people, and they dominate much of the country's economic and cultural imagination. Australia's political system reflects its history, British parliamentary roots, federal compromise, and a modern democratic culture with strong civil liberties and regular elections. Australia's population pattern is one of its most defining features. The country has almost 29 million people, but they are not spread evenly across the continent. Australia is highly urbanized, and much of the population is concentrated along the eastern seaboard. This creates a sharp contrast between global, dense, coastal cities and the vast inland regions that are far less populated. Sydney and Melbourne are major economic and cultural hubs, while Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, Canberra, and other centres play important regional roles. The result is a country that can feel both crowded and empty depending on where you stand. Urban Australia is connected to global finance, migration, universities, media, and technology. Inland Australia evokes distance, mining, agriculture, remote communities, and the practical challenge of maintaining services across enormous spaces. Modern Australian culture is deeply shaped by immigration. The country has one of the highest foreign-born population shares in the world, which has transformed its cities, food, languages, neighbourhoods, and public life. Earlier national identity was often framed through British inheritance and settler traditions, but contemporary Australia is far more diverse. Migration from Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and many other regions has made Australia a multicultural society, especially in its major cities. At the same time, the country continues to wrestle with the place of Indigenous peoples in the national story. Questions about recognition, land, memory, inequality, and constitutional identity remain central. So Australian culture is not a single simple image. It is a living negotiation between ancient Indigenous continuity, British colonial institutions, immigrant communities, and a modern Asia-Pacific reality. Australia's economy is highly developed and ranks among the wealthier economies in the world on a per-person basis. A major reason is the combination of natural resources, stable institutions, education, services, and international trade. Australia has abundant mineral and energy resources, and resource exports have long connected it to fast-growing markets, especially in Asia. But the economy is not only mining. It includes finance, education, tourism, agriculture, technology, health, and professional services. International students, global trade routes, and investment flows all matter. The country also ranks highly in quality of life, health, education, economic freedom, civil liberties, and political rights. Still, the resource-based side of the economy creates vulnerabilities, dependence on commodity cycles, environmental pressures, and the challenge of balancing prosperity with climate and land stewardship. Australia's place in the world is shaped by geography as much as by politics. It is often called a middle power, not a superpower, but influential, wealthy, stable, and strategically important. It participates in major international groups including the United Nations, the G20, the OECD, the World Trade Organization, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the Pacific Islands Forum, the Pacific Community, and the Commonwealth of Nations. These memberships reflect a country with both global and regional interests. Australia looks toward the Pacific, Asia, Europe, and North America at the same time. It is geographically close to Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, economically tied to Asian markets, historically linked to Britain, and strategically aligned with the United States. That layered identity gives Australia influence, but also forces it to manage competing diplomatic pressures. Security is another major part of Australia's modern role. The country has one of the world's highest military expenditures and participates in alliances and intelligence partnerships such as ANZUS, AUKUS, and Five Eyes. It is also a major non-NATO ally of the United States. These relationships show how seriously Australia takes its strategic environment, especially as power balances shift across the Indo-Pacific. The same isolation that once made Australia seem distant now makes its location strategically valuable, close enough to key sea lanes, regional tensions, Pacific partners, and Asian markets to matter. In the end, Australia is best understood as a continent nation shaped by ancient cultures, harsh environments, British colonization, democratic evolution, immigration, resources, and strategic geography. Its story is not just about remoteness. It is about how a remote continent became deeply connected to the world. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.